This broadcast is live.
This broadcast is live. And hello, my name is Yehuda Shamroth. I am talking to you from Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel. Welcome, everybody, to the Israel Torah Bring Them Home project. I'm speaking to you from Ramat Beit Shemesh, and Josh Wander, who is the brainchild behind this whole thing, is joining us from Jerusalem shortly. The primary goal of IsraelTorah.org and Bring Them Home is to provide Torah resources that explain and prove why Jews should consider making Aliyah as a viable life option today more than ever. This is a collaborative project, between Yehuda Shamroth and Josh Wander, mostly Josh, but I'm helping him as his main assistant. We make videos discussing Aliyah and the options of Aliyah and the Torah sources for Aliyah. And with the world events as they are right now, I think people are thinking about it more than ever. I have a project called the Miriam Project, and I interview people about the Geula Shalema, which is you can't hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Which is a related project. We're very, very pleased and honored to bring back Rabbi Winston. He's giving us a series of shirim on Thursday evenings, whenever possible. And he picks a wonderful topic every single week. And this week's we're talking about power struggles, and he'll explain what that means. Well, I don't know if we're streaming or not. Can we check? Anybody have a Facebook they can check? They can check. Okay. I have to move over to Facebook, Josh. So hold on. All right, hold on. We'll just tell you about Rabbi Winston. Rabbi Pinchas Winston was born in Toronto, Canada. He received his rabbinic ordination in 1988 and has worked very closely along Rabbi Avram Kovshitz Zatzal and Rabbi Noach Weinberg of Esha Torah. Rabbi Winston attended Esha Torah in the Old City, and when he went to Toronto for a period of time, he's from Toronto, but when he went back, he was the head of Esha Torah Toronto. He made Aliyah and has been living in Telstone. And he is a prolific writer of every means of Judaism, from which, if you can access 36.org, and I'll put that up there for you. It's his website. He has written on every possible topic and given shirim and given wonderful mini-series and workshops on everything about Eretz Yisrael, end of days. He's written many, many, many books, which you can buy on the 36.org online bookstore. And they're available on PDF, MP3, Kindle formats. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Rabbi Pinchas Winston. And Rabbi, you can get us to... It's streaming on our site. Okay. Streaming on our site, but not on Facebook. Okay, we'll work on that. And Rabbi, I'm going to try to make you the main speaker, and I'll just disappear for a bit. We got both of us here. And what about this? Yeah, I'm real good at this. Add to stream. Nope. Okay, we can start talking anyway, Rabbi, and we'll get it going.
No, just to clarify, I didn't head the issue Toronto. I just basically worked there. I was chief rabbi of the IDF for a day. That was also a mistake, but it was prestigious. It was in the papers. Anyhow, we are told. Just as a side point, I pick my topics based upon what's going on in the world. I try to answer questions, if not directly, indirectly, try to put things in a Torah perspective. That it's important to understand. Just like, for example, the physical world mimics the spiritual world, and the same thing in the physical world basically is that we only see what's available to us, but below the surface is atoms and molecules and nucleus and all these different things, and there are all kinds of different forces working. There's the strong force, weak force. There's a lot of things going on below the surface that we can't see, and it dictates what's going on in the physical world, even though we're not aware of it. And what we see seems to be so very simple and obvious, but the reality is there's a lot going on below the surface that's having a tremendous impact that we might not be aware of, but it's really running the show. All our strengths, limitations that we have, what we can accomplish, is all based upon what's going on in the molecular world. even more so when it comes to the spiritual world and the physical world. Everything in the physical world is just a function of the spiritual world. It's just the end result, so to speak. So it begins up there and then it comes down here. We can affect the worlds up above by praying and doing mitzvahs, or God forbid the opposite, by not praying and sinning instead. It stops light from coming down, and if we are doing the right thing, then light comes down and we can send light back up again. But it's all the spiritual world. The spiritual world it's where it's at, and Kabbalistically, it's very detailed. You go into Eitz Chaim of the Arizal, you'll find a tremendous amount of explanation about how the world works. There are things called spheres and partsufim, lots of details. And to the average person, that might have some important, or it's not like a need to know type of a thing, but the reality is it's very fundamental. And even though it's not something that's explained in any real way in most of the Sfarim that you buy and you read, or online even, you have to go looking for it and read the actual sources of the material. It's dictating what's happening historically and what's going on right now in the States. People are surprised and shocked to see what's happening. I've heard it all week long. They can't believe what they're seeing. They can't believe what they're reading. It's like this is shocking to them. But if you're makubal, if you're a Kabbalist, or just somebody who has been exposed to Kabbalah, it's not shocking at all. It's not surprising at all. In fact, it was expected, because you have to understand historical context, what things are happening based upon a divine master plan for Maaseh Bereshis, for history, and the clock is ticking away. And even though most people are oblivious to that clock, and they don't live their life by it in any obvious way, they are living by it in a very non-obvious way, because it's God's master plan for creation. He's got a schedule, he's got time, a timetable for all things that are happening. And certain things have to happen by a certain point in history. Like, for example, there was the Holocaust, there was World War II, and then there was State of Israel that was born after. And as controversial as that may be, to make a connection, it has been said, including by Gedolei Hador, that Eretz Yisrael today is built upon the ashes of the Holocaust. And they're making a historical statement, meaning that because of that, that happened, European exile ended, and we got the state, and we decided to have our homeland once again, and we went to the UN, and they agreed to it miraculously. And it's just more like a sequence of events that happened, and we got a little bit of world sympathy, not a lot of world sympathy, but a little bit of world sympathy. And maybe that was certainly President Truman was affected by the Holocaust in terms of what happened to the Jews, and one of the reasons why he felt it was so important to fight on behalf of the fledgling states and to push it through the UN, and that's what happened. But from a Kabbalistic point of view, it's much deeper than that. It's not just that we one followed the other, one followed the other specifically, and you might even go you have to go so far as to say that it's not a coincidence that we received our state not from the UN. That's just the means down here to accomplish it, but from Hashem. From God. God gave us back the state. God gave us back the land. He gave us back the land of Eretz Yisrael, promised to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and there was prophecies about getting it back at the end of days, and ingathering of the exiles, and everything just coming true. So it's like absolutely beyond remarkable when you read what was predicted, and we know was predicted like over 1,000 years ago, and certainly 2,000 years ago, and here it has happened in our very time, before our very eyes, because God knows the future. It's not just that, let's give it back to them. They've been away for a long time. No, since Maaseh Bereshis, what's going on today was planned. It's all built into into creation. It's all built in, and therefore, it's a project in a sense, because like a building, a condominium or a complex. There's the plan, and it's all drawn out, and there's even renderings done of what it's going to look like at the end. We haven't put a shovel in the ground yet, and there's already models built. So we know what it's going to look like. And if you visit the construction site from day after day from the beginning all the way through, so then it doesn't look like anything. And you see a big hole in the ground first, and then you see the foundation and the underground parking lot, and then the first floor, the second floor, and even when all the floors are up, they don't have the curtain wall is not yet in place. It doesn't look like the building. You can't recognize it. At some point in time, when they begin to add enough of the building to the building, it becomes recognizable. You can say, oh, that looks familiar. But the whole thing was being built according to a plan, and not just a plan, but a timetable. And that timetable had to be followed because it has to be coordinated. Otherwise, the wrong materials show up at the wrong day, or the wrong workers, or the wrong company supplying the wrong thing. You don't want the air conditioning showing up months in advance of having to install it because A, it can get ruined, and B, you have to pay the bill once you receive it. And it's all done according to a schedule. And they know what date they want to finish by. And they even make contracts with people. People buy the apartments, they buy the condominiums, and there's like a date when they can move into it. And it's written in that if that date is not, they don't get, they don't get the key by that time, and they've sold their houses and they've sold their apartments. They're all depending. It's all schedules, all worked out. And as long as everything moves smoothly within a certain period of time, then everything is great. And they finish building it, and they sold it, and they move in, and everyone's happy, and it works out nicely. But sometimes, for whatever reason, right now, for example, the coronavirus slowed down construction. A lot of people who were hoping to move into apartments at this time or soon after have to wait because they couldn't finish the construction on time. But they have to talk to the bank, and they have to talk to that they've sold their houses, and it makes things very complicated. And then there's panic, and there has to be contingency plans. So sometimes the contractor may have to put people up in a hotel for a while. It's very expensive, and it eats away from his profits. Or the people themselves, depends what the contract has said. They have to pay for it, and it eats away from their profits from selling the house. And you get the idea, you get the picture. And creation is exactly the same way. That is a master plan. God knew from day one when Mashiach is going to come. Even though he can come early, you could always bring him early, and we wait for him. Every day he should come, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, that's the way it is. But the reality is that God knew, because he's above time, so he's already in the future, and he's in the past, and he's in the present. It's all one thing for God. So he knows what the plan's going to look like, and what the date has to be done by, and for a specific reason. These are called katesim by the Gemara. Like a kate is like it's like an end point in history. So you got this like period of history where things just going about more or less casually, and then you get to what's called the kate, where a certain amount of history has to have been happened by that time and rectified by that time in order for this event to take place. So we were destined to get our land back in 1948, but you just don't get it back. There has to be a certain amount of merit. History has to have accomplished certain things by that time. And sometimes, if you don't do what you have to, you wanted to buy something expensive, you want to buy a new car, and there's no deadline. You have a deadline, but the car dealership, they don't have a deadline. And you tell them, I'll be back by June 16th with at least most of the payments. And it turns out that you get fired, and you couldn't get the money together, and you come back and say, I'll need a few more months after that. Fine, good, take your time. The car's here. We have other cars. We get the money, come visit us. But that's not the way creation works. A kate is a specific time in history by which certain Geula has to happen either partially or completely. And if we're not ready in time, and God knows exactly how long it will take to finish off what has to be done, and this is a discussion unto itself that involves the concept of holy sparks and different Kabbalistic forces in creation. One is called Chasadim, one is called Gevurus, and how they interplay, and how our mitzvahs of learning Torah, how it affects that, and how the bad guys help with that, but not the way we like it. And doing mitzvahs, learning Torah, fixes creation and speaks. It's all, Kabbalah explains all of it in explicit detail. And it's very fascinating, but more important, it's very enlightening. And it changes the way you look at history, the way you look at reality. And what's going on today, from a Kabbalistic point of view, makes perfect sense. We don't like it. We wish it didn't happen that way. The Gemara speaks about two possible ways for Mashiach to come, as we spoke about before, Achishana and Bita. Achishana is a pleasant way. It happens in a way that's peaceful, that we would like it to occur that way. The bad guys just stop being bad guys, and the good guys increase the good. And then God says, here I am. Mashiach shows up and just helps us to transition to the next period very peacefully. That's not the way it's happened in the past for the most part. And it doesn't seem to be happening that way right now as well. And it certainly didn't happen in 1945 to or at least 1940 to 1945. And before that, not just in terms of the Holocaust, but also in terms of World War II. I mean, 72 million people perished in that war, and billions of dollars of destruction. And the Jewish people, as small as they are, made up 1/12 of those deaths. and then comes the Eretz Yisrael. Now, someone would say, well, if you'd asked me, I wouldn't have made the deal. If God said it's going to cost us that many people, that much suffering to have our land back, hold on to the land a little bit longer. And let's work it out and make it that we don't have to go through such a terrible disaster in history. But that's not the way it works. It's the divine plan. And it's for our good, not for God's good. I mean, he's eternal. He can wait forever, literally forever, for Mashiach to come. If he's rushing things through, it's for us. Everything is for us. It's never for him. It's always for the good he's doing for us. So it's in our best interest to understand what's going on whatever level we can, and to, first of all, work with it and try to mitigate the circumstances. And that's what I've been doing, at least since 2004, when I began to see a lot of this material. It's what we're supposed to be about, the Jewish people. We're the ones who are supposed to know this, and we're the ones who are supposed to pay attention to it and to do what has to be done. So the other aspect of it is that even if you can't change it, at least you know what's going on, and you can do something about it. I'm going to say something that would be so controversial. If you're living in America, it's on my mind every single day, and there's people I'd like to tell it to, and I like to write it and put it on Twitter and all these different things and tell people, but I know it's going to fall on deaf ears because it always does. It always has in the past. It did during World War II. But based upon what we'll say tonight, based upon what I've seen up until now, I would tell people living in America, living outside the land, to seriously consider how they would get out when the time, not if, but when the time comes, what means they have available to them. I would have told people years ago to begin selling their houses, to liquidate. You want to live there longer, fine, but be flexible. Start moving your money and things like that to Israel, as many people have done. Many people have done, and they made Aliyah on their own terms over the last 25, 40, 50, 60 years. And this type of a statement gets people all panicky. This rabbi said this, what does he understand? Was he no? Just a fanatic, extreme? Fine. I understand that that's what's going to happen. That's what people are going to say. And I shudder sometimes because I really hate controversy. And I hate being the center of this type of controversy. And the only reason why I would make a statement like that is because A, I believe in it, and B, because I'm worried about the rest of the Jewish people. It's not in my necessarily best interest to get everyone over here. I mean, it is ultimately in terms of the Muslim Mashiach, the Messianic era. There's no question it changes everything. It's a game changer. But I say it sincerely based upon what's going on in history. As somebody who has spent time learning history, and that's the main thing over here. I mean, the very first point, it says in Devarim, in Parshas Hazinu, Lamed Beis, the seventh pasuk, it says, Zechor es yimasa olam. There's actually a mitzvah in the Torah to know history, and not just Jewish history, but world history. Because this Rashi brings down, going all the way back to Enosh, back to the time of the Mabel and Noach's time, before the Jewish people became the Jewish people, before Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov were walking the face of the earth. Already go back there, because history follows patterns. When we had prophets, Nevi'im, who could talk to God, they had God's ear, so to speak, and God had their ear and told them what we have to know. So then we had the inside edge. And even then we didn't listen to it all the time, especially if it wasn't favorable. They took Yirmiyahu and what he wrote and they burned it, countless times. And he was a prophet of God, one of the most important prophets we've ever had. But they didn't want to hear what he had to say. So we lost prophets in the end. We have no prophecy today. So how are we supposed to know what to do, how to respond? Or are we just like sitting ducks and just let God take care of the whole thing, like little children who have no idea how to work in this world? Their parents handle everything. So A, God left behind prophecies for us that talk to us in our day and age. And B, he said, take a look at the Torah, take a look at history, because it's a cause and effect relationship. The clothing will change. The names of the nations will change. The distractions will change. The games and the toys and even some of the Yetzer will change, but man doesn't change. His drives are the same. He has a Yetzer Hara, the same one he's had going back to the Garden of Eden. And since you just find different ways to do the same thing. And because we don't change that much, God doesn't have to change with respect to us. He responds to us, and he tells us, that if you look back there and see what happened, what went wrong, what people were doing, and how he responded to that, then you'll know how to do it in your time as well. So even this is 2020, 5780, the United States of America, or Canada, or Europe, whatever the case may be, wherever people might be, wherever Jews might be found someplace in the world, it doesn't make a difference. It's all part of the same master plan going back to the beginning of time, the beginning of history. And even though the Torah stopped recording events with the death of Moshe Rabbeinu, and the book of prophets ended, by the time of Purim, and after that, basically, we lost touch. And even though we had Ruach HaKodesh, we had Tanoim, the Zohar, we had people who wrote things, and they seemed to have some type of connection or tradition, or maybe, they met with prophets because there are stories of prophets coming to visit these people and tell them inside information. They were dead, they came back, as angels, really, at this point. Still, we wander through history. We wander through life, just waiting, and hoping. Now, when times were bad, so then we hoped the Mashiach would come. We'd be saved. We looked forward to redemption. When times are good, then it was just the opposite. We hope he wouldn't come because it's going well. I mean, there's been no period in Jewish history in current times, maybe since Spain, where the Jews have enjoyed so much success, both materially, kind of spiritually, in as much as we have beautiful shuls, beautiful Bati Midrashos, printing press opened up the Sforim. You can go online, access 40,000 Sforim online that maybe you could never afford to buy or even find, today. And it's absolutely awesome. It's beyond, comprehension. And God gave it all to us that we should remain in touch with his master plan. So it says, take a look, pay attention. Don't just, look the other way. Even Avraham, when he walked by Migdal Bavel, he paid attention. He looked, he commented. He didn't say, that's not me. I don't want to be involved. I'm not going to pay attention. Look, God, no, he gave Musar to people, and he took lessons from it. And it was Mechazek him. So, speaking of which, Migdal Bavel, it's really an important point. And we read the story on the surface, the Tower of Babel, right? Why is it called the Tower of Babel? Because, as it says in the Chumash, God came down with his Beis Din, his heavenly tribunal, said, what are these guys doing down there, right? Took a look. I mean, he knew before he came, right? But the Torah does this because it's all part of the learning process. So he goes, wow, look at there. And you should know, by the way, it's just not a tower. The Medrash says it was massive. It was massive. It would take a year to climb to the top of it, and not because there were coffee shops along the way and cafe, the whole thing, and restaurants where people stayed overnight in the hotels and no, it just they had to sleep along the way 100%, but they wanted to get to the top. In fact, that's one of the reasons why they built it, because the Medrash brings down that there are three reasons why the tower was built. They were masterminds. There was method to their madness. It was madness for sure, but there was method to it. And it says, right, the Medrash says that, first of all, it was Nimrod. The Torah doesn't tell you about Nimrod at this point in time, but it was Nimrod, the mighty hunter, who became king of the world more or less at that time. And he was the one who spoke to everybody, not just people living in Babel. They chose, that Shinar, where it was a valley, because that was a massive place where everybody could assemble to build this tower from the bottom up. And it became a worldwide project. And it says, right, that Mitzrayim, meaning that's what became Egypt, and Mitzrayim was one of the descendants of Noah, and Put and Canaan. They were the ones who said, let us build a tower so high that it will reach heaven, and we will make for ourselves a name, lest we be scattered over the world by another flood. That was their shita. That was their opinion. They knew about the flood. It was only 360 some odd years since the flood actually occurred. And they were worried about the next one. So they said, before this happens again, before mankind gets washed away, let's build this massive tower where we can actually rise above the flood waters, because Noah and the Teva, the flood waters went up until 15 amas above the tallest mountain, and we'll go higher. and will be protected from the flood. That was their shita. Okay, that was their idea. The second group, right, were after named for themselves, intended to use the top of the tower as a place to assemble idol worship. It was a place to be. It was an assembly point for idol worshippers, because idol worshippers, the higher you up, they have, the Greeks, Zeus sits up in heaven with all these other gods, so to speak. From there, that's what we imagine gods to be, high up, somewhere up in the heavens, somewhere on the top of the highest mountain. We, of course, know that God's everywhere. That's what we teach kids from day one, that God is truly everywhere. But that's where they imagined the gods to settle. So therefore, they wanted to get as close as possible to their idol worship, and they wanted to build this tower to put idol worship on top. The third decided that the earth was not enough for them, even though they had pretty good control over the earth. This is all from the Medrash and also the Gemara and Sanhedrin. And it says the third decided that the earth they wanted more power. They wanted more power, and they placed an idol with a sword in its hand on top of the tower to declare war against God. So there are three opinions, actually really four. The Medrash brings down a fourth group who decided that there's no such thing as God. The flood was not a punishment. It was a natural occurrence. Somehow the Shemaims break open every 1,656 years, because that's when the flood took place from creation, 1656, which is 2005 BCE or something like that. And they said, we're going to do this. This is only the first tower. We're going to build a bunch of towers at different places in the world, and we'll make this massive support for the heaven that if it breaks open again, it won't spill all over us and make a massive flood. So these were the three shitas. These are the three opinions, the three intentions in building the tower. Number one, that they wanted to avoid being washed all over the world and by the flood itself. The second one, they wanted to make a place of idol worship, and the third one, they wanted to make it a stand. They're telling God, you have no right to all of this. We want this and we want that. So according to Kabbalah, it's like that, a little bit different, but you should know that when they built the tower, they looked like bumbling fools. People like, what were they thinking? Like, what type of children were they that they should think like this? But the truth is, they had Kabbalistic traditions, and when they designed the tower, they did it Kabbalistically. The amount of bricks they used, how they used them, how they built it. They were actually trying to affect the spheres, a very Kabbalistic concept, which is the basis of what runs this world. So again, there was definitely method, there's Kabbalistic method to their insanity, to their madness. But these were the three opinions, or really four opinions, but two of them are kind of the same thing. The one that wants to hold the world up from being flooded again is the same as the one that says that the flood was a natural occurrence and therefore we can stop it technologically. That was their plan. So being in the valley that they had to make their own bricks and building materials. And over time, the tower grew so large that it took a year to climb to the top of it. People were expendable, the Medrash says, but building supplies were not. In other words, if someone fell off the side of the tower, as they say, no big deal. But if a brick fell off the tower, they lost one brick. That was tragic. And of course, God saw that and pays attention to that, and that did not work in their merit. The divine response, we know. It's there in the Chumash, chapter 11 in Bereshis, says that God came down with his tribunal, took a look, and then foiled the whole plan. He ruined everything, undid what they tried to accomplish. But he didn't just do it at one shot. He did it in different stages. Again, this is the Gemara, this is the Medrash, but it's very important because these details give us insight into what God thinks about different things and how he responds to it, so we'll understand how to deal with the situation at hand. So it says, he worked measure for measure, as God always does, so that the group that had wanted to use the tower to avoid future floodwaters, they were the ones who were scattered. They were scattered. They didn't want to be scattered, so measure for measure, they were scattered. Each one was sent back to the country of their origin. They were forced back for some reason or another. How does it happen? It could be they ran out of money. It could be there was no food available. It doesn't make a difference what means God uses down here to accomplish his purpose. The bottom line is always going to be, what is the net result? What's the end result in the end? That's how we know what God's after. The means he uses, he makes it as as not obvious that he's involved as possible, always for the sake of free will. Because if we can see the hand of God, oh, that's definitely the hand of God, then people will immediately on the spot do tshuva as they should be doing. So what God does, he camouflages it in historic events, and what the events of the day, what the newspapers cover, what the politicians throw out and accomplish and do. It doesn't make it corruption, no corruption, conspiracy, no conspiracy. It's all in God's hands to do as he pleases. As the Medrash says, the mean finds its mean. What does that mean? Just very quickly, the snake, for example, in the Garden of Eden was not a bad guy in the beginning. The Gemara says that the snake was meant to be Adam's best friend, or at least his butler. It would be his butler. It would help Adam, survive in the garden and to make the best of it. But when Adam failed to tell Chava the proper halacha regarding not touching the tree, and the snake took advantage of that, and of course the Sitra Achra, the accusing angel, his job is to get in our way. He's called the Satan because he's an obstruction. Word Satan means obstruction. He's in our path because the name of the game is free will. It's always free will. It's all about free will. Not free will. But here, it's always about free will. Everything comes down to that concept until Mashiach comes. So he exists, and the evil exists that he can do to confront us, to force us to have to, or to compel us to have to make conscious choices where we do the good and we reject the bad. And then we earn reward in the world to come, which is what this world is supposed to lead to. Because as the rabbis point out in Birkei Avos, this world is only a corridor to the next one. Don't get too involved in this one in terms of, use this world to accomplish good. And then when you get to the next one, then you have all the pleasures forever. So they were scattered, however it happened. Now those who wanted to wage war against God, the Medrash says, a very interesting happened. It says they were transformed into monkeys, spirits, and demons. So what's the measure for measure in that? Like, why would God specifically do these things to this group that wanted to go to war against God? So we were made B'Tselem Elokim. We were made in the image of God. That means that we have to live up to that. As the Sforno points out, being made in the image of God is a potential. We have to actually become an Elohim. Elohim is a name that can be used for God and also for a judge and also for an angel, because it denotes, as opposed to Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the Shem Havaya, we don't pronounce the way it's written today, it denotes an intellectual being that discerns truth. That's what the term Elohim actually means. So B'Tselem Elokim means that we're made in such a way that, like God, we can analyze things and we can discern truth and make conscious decisions to do godly things. That's what it means. But you have to grow into that. You have to fight against Yetzer Hara and make yourself that way, because you see from day one, a child is all Yetzer Hara. And then we have to fight it off as we get older. The process of growing up is the process of maturation, of becoming selfless. We start off selfish and we work our way towards being selfless. So when you're selfless and you're living the way you're supposed to be, and you're not going to war against God, you are acting B'Tselem Elokim. But if you go to war against God, on whatever level you do it, whether you are literally going to war against God as they did back then, or you are telling the world that you're an atheist or agnostic, and God doesn't exist, and the Torah is not true, or and that creation did not require God to be involved, that could happen spontaneously or randomly, but you're pushing God out of the picture, making him less and less prominent. That's going to war against God. Whatever you want to call it, freedom of speech, you want to call it, being fair to everybody people don't believe it. No, but if you're going to push God out of life in a society at any point in time, that's called going to war against God, and that's called not acting B'Tselem Elokim. So measure for measure, their B'Tselem Elokim, their B'Tselem Elokus, their godliness was extracted and taken away from them. So you've got monkeys that are very human-like, but they're not B'Tselem Elokim. They're very cute and dangerous sometimes, and they very talented, so to speak, and they can be trained. But as close as they are to mankind, and for some people they might be the missing link, but for most of us they're not. And as close as they are to us, there's still a million mile difference because they're missing that spark that makes them a tzelem Elokim. But if we also live not using that spark, then we can be reduced down to their level. Demons, like Gemara points out, are very much like humans. They have some traits that are like human and some traits that are not like humans. Okay, but that's all of this category for not acting for some Elokim, because even somebody who worships idols, which is a terrible thing, it's considered to be heresy to worship idols, but it's still the drive for religion. It's still the drive for God. It's just that they're cheating. Idol worship is a drive for godliness without doing the work. It's cheating. It's God in man's image, as opposed to man being in God's image. So there's still some aspect of Elokus, perhaps, in them that at least they're warranting. Their avodah zarah has to be destroyed, but maybe there's tshuva for them. If not, then they have to be destroyed as well, according to halacha. Okay, but that's what explains the second group. So the third group, who wanted to make the tower to be the center of idol worship, they were the ones who had their languages confounded. They're the ones they're the Babel in the Migdal Babel, same thing, right? They're the ones who were they had Lashon Kodesh. Now, why? Why is that? Because God says they're all unified, and this is what they do with their unification. Because language is the most important unifying ability that mankind has. When you speak the same language, you can join with somebody else. You can become connected, even more so than physically, because you're sharing ideas. And it's knowledge of one another and of concepts that we become one with anything. As it says, the seichel, the muskel, and the maskil all become one. The seichel, the brain, that which is being perceived, and the understanding of it, they all become one and unified. Ultimately, to know something, to love something, if it's a good thing, if it's virtuous. So because they used, and especially Lashon Kodesh, which is Hebrew, but it's biblical Hebrew, not the kind today that basically is just English transliterated into Hebrew words. Almost today, it's almost a mistake to go to an Alpan. You should learn English instead and just learn how to add the Hebrew accent to the English word, because that's modern day Hebrew. But biblical Hebrew is all based upon its shorashim, its roots, and what each root means as a description of the essence of the reality of something. So because they abused the power of language and unity, it was taken away from them. And the Medrash says that when that began to happen, someone would ask for a brick, but they would be passed a spade instead, or someone would ask for a shovel or trowel, and they got angry, got frustrated, and threw people off the tower, and that was the end of that. Okay, that was what happened to the people. Now, what happened to the tower? Okay, what happened to the tower? Says that the uppermost third of the tower, because there are three parts, three intentions, three parts of the tower. The uppermost part, which had the sword placed upon it, was completely burned, like an Ir Hanidachas, like a city that turns to idol worship. It's burned to ashes. Because that's what idol worship is. It's nothing. It's just ashes. Like wind comes along, you see a log that has been burned in a fire, and the shape of the log is there. And then you step on it, or you kick it, or the wind comes along even and blows it, and the whole thing just shimmers away like smoke, because it's nothing. There's a whole discussion in the Gemara that if a shofar was used for Rosh Hashanah that belonged to somebody in a city that worshipped idols, and the halacha was to burn that city with everything inside of it, including the shofar, does the shofar count? You have it, it's in your hand, you're blowing it. But because it was supposed to be burnt, it's as if it doesn't exist, as if you did blow the shofar. So therefore, the first part, the idol worship part, that was completely wiped away. That was burned up completely. Okay, it says the Medrash, the bottom third, was swallowed up by the earth, also completely. But you could see a little bit of it, and it says from time to time you could see it. Go up and go down. So some say that that's because that idea, which was using the tower as an assembly point to unify A new world order, basically. That was the idea. It was a new world order to unify all the people of the world around one tower and give man the strength to run the world and take control of it from God. So that part was swallowed up by the earth, but wasn't destroyed. It was swallowed up, indicating that unlike idol worship, which is gone from reality, it's always there in the background. This idea of a new world order is always there in the background, and from time to time it reappears. The idea of the Third Reich. Most of us are only familiar with the Third Reich because that's what the Nazis tried to become. That's what they called themselves. But why? Why? It has to do with the Roman Empire. So I didn't know for years until I actually looked it up. It was very fascinating and kind of frightening too. But it turns out that everybody wanted to be the Third Reich. Even the colonists, the American colonists who first began, thought they would be the Third Reich. They wanted to call Washington Rome. That's why everything's built according to like the Roman architecture. And you have the Senate and senators and all that. And the Thames, Potomac was supposed to be called the Thames. They wanted to duplicate Rome over there because everybody from Europe had dreamed of becoming the Third Reich, which is like for controlling the world, an empire, even for the right reasons. And that's what was going on. So the Nazis, they were the ones who really took it to heart, and they tried to impose that. And they looked at themselves as the continuation of the Roman Empire. And they were. And they really were, in ways even they didn't understand. But we need to understand. Because the Medrash talks about 4 exiles of Jewish people. The first one, Mitzrayim, is unique and not part of the 4. The 4 were predicted because it was known that the first one would not do its job. And the other 4 are like subsets of Mitzrayim. Babel, Babylonia. They were conquered by Medai. So the Median exile followed right in the heels of the Babylonian exile. Then came the Greek exile. And the last one, the 4th and final one, that's the angel that Yaakov saw go up, and never come back down again. Some say he did. So because the exile is going to be so long. And it lasted 2,000 years until 1938. When the Kristallnacht launched, so to speak, the Holocaust and brought an end after thousands of years of European exile, and that was that. And then the Jews moved on. We'll get to that, B'ezras Hashem. Okay, so that was the third part. What about the middle third of the tower? So it says that remained intact. That wasn't affected. God left that for some reason. And the Medrash says that it alone was so high, just this 1/3 of the tower was so high that if you climb to the top of it and you look down from, the tallest palm tree looked like some little grasshopper. Massive tower, so high up, everything down below looked like nothing. I mean, we're talking about like airplane height. You look from an airplane down below, it looks like a little model of a city. And you go a little higher and higher, you can't see anything else. And that's how high it was. The question is, why was it allowed to remain until this very day? Well, it's not there today, so at some point in time it did disappear. But at least back at the beginning, then it still existed. So why was it that God allowed it to exist? Okay, so the question is answered really by what's the underlying premise of all of it, what everybody was doing. The Gemara says an interesting thing. The Gemara says that, and I'll read to you, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, the Jewish people knew that idol worship has no substance. They knew rocks, stones, metal, statue, he doesn't even breathe. Right? This is a god, a representation, fine. But an actual god that you have to worship this thing, they knew. And the truth is, everybody probably knew at some point in time, maybe way, way back at the beginning when people were superstitious at the origins of other religions. Judaism is not a religion. It's a way of life because God told us this is the way the world's made. So it doesn't depend upon the mystical to support its existence in any way. It's God's word, and that's the bottom line. No matter what else you learn or hear or see, or what seems to contradict it, it's just all coming from man. So science says, no, it can't be because the world, that's what you see. That's how you understand. But God made the world. He's telling you, this is the way it is. And though today you think it contradicts it, later on you'll see it's not true. Because your opinion's always changing. as your knowledge changes. But God's knowledge is eternal. It's infinite. So therefore, He doesn't make mistakes. Whatever He says, that's the bottom line. So they knew that idol worship, avodah zarah, had no substance, but they did it anyhow. The Gemara talks about, it's crazy. The Beis Hamikdash, the time of the Beis Hamikdash, people served in the Beis Hamikdash, serving God, and they got an idol tucked away inside their toga, whatever they're wearing at that time. And there's one story where somebody wouldn't even give up his idol, even though he was dying, and falls on top of it and dies because it causes the stomach to explode. And people are obsessed. And before we think that this is an ancient thing, it's not. The form of idol worship just changes from generation to generation. But we're all doing it on some level too. There are things that we worship. We shouldn't. The almighty dollar for one, or the almighty shekel, whatever country you're living in. But so then, why did they do it? Why did they worship idols, which is such an extreme sin, right in the Ten Commandments? Why did they do it? The Gemara says they did not actually believe in it and only worshipped idols to permit themselves to engage in the forbidden relationships in public. In this week's parsha, actually, there is a pasuk in the Gemara. Sorry, pasuk in the Chumash. The Gemara explains in Shabbos on Kuf Lamed Amud Aleph, the first page right there towards the bottom. The Gemara talk about different mitzvahs that we accepted upon ourselves. B'simcha, those are the mitzvahs we still do b'simcha. And the mitzvahs we took upon ourselves that we have to do in pain, we're always painful. Those are the ones that remain painful for us. The ones that we didn't like at all, we still don't like. And the Gemara brings an example of the ones we don't like at all, and it talks about the forbidden relationships, the things that we're not supposed to do, the relationships we're not supposed to have, including incest and all these different things. Apparently, at one point in history, that was something that people favored, And when we were told you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that, we didn't like that, and we cried about it. This week's parsha, Rashi brings down the Gemara that mentions on a particular passage that's what we're crying about. So the Gemara is saying that the driving force behind everything, behind all of that, was a more liberal lifestyle. The Torah is very conservative, it is godly. The Torah tells you to live b'tzelem Elokim. Here's what you have to do. I made the world. I know what's right. I know what's good. And here's how you can do that. And if you do that, not only will you go to the world to come, but you'll be at Tzem Elokim. You'll fulfill yourself. You'll feel good about yourself. You'll feel fulfilled because that's who you are in essence. We spoke about it in Shara Geula, this week on Tuesday night, that this is the essence of who we are. We are a soul. We're not a body. When we act like a body, it feels good for the time being, but it hurts us inside because it's not the way we're hardwired. We do a mitzvah, we feel wonderful. Yeah, a person does an illicit act or eats something they shouldn't eat, just a simple thing like being on a diet. And you're in a diet and you want to stick to the diet. And you break the diet and you eat the piece of chocolate cake, and as you're eating it, it tastes amazing. Boston cream pie. But it's finished and it's over. Not only do you no longer taste it anymore, but it's bitter. Whenever we do anything we know is not moral, when we're finished, it's bitter. That's what the Medrash says. What Shlomo HaMelech wrote. It's bitter in the end. And we feel terrible about ourselves. And we're angry at ourselves, and we'll get angry at others because we're angry at ourselves in the end. Like Amnon and Tamar mentioned in Tanakh, in Pirkei Avos. In the end, he hated her more than he loved her because he hated himself for what he did. She didn't do anything wrong. She was a tzedekis, a righteous woman. And he goes ahead and he abuses her, and then he throws her out because why? Because she said yes. She didn't say yes. He forced it. So he should have rahmana, sympathy for it. Why not? Because he hates himself. So therefore he hates her. Because anybody who makes us remind us ourselves about the things we did wrong, we don't like them. It's a bad memory. I don't like the memory, so I don't like you. So that's the way we are. We have to do the right thing. and we have a difficult time doing the wrong thing. So they have to find rationalizations and justifications, and and idol worship at one point in time was for the sake of for this very reason, to permit themselves things that were not permissible. They had a taiva, they had drives, desires, a yetzer hara, an evil inclination. It's driving them. I mean, just step back and look at put the politics to the side and the personalities to the side. But what's the real war going on in America right now? And the real war going on inside Eretz Yisrael and probably all kinds of places. But those are the two main places Jews can be found. So what's the war, right? What's the left versus the right, the liberals versus the conservatives? Well, the liberals, they want this. They want the permission. They want to feel free to be able to go live as liberally as they want and have a clean conscience. And the other side says, but you can't. Well, we don't want to also. You don't think we also enjoy eating tray food? We'd also enjoy, maybe to go to the beach in Shabbos sometimes? For sure we would, 100%. But we don't do it because it's not meaningful. It's not the ultimate thing to do. It's a horror. But we believe in the higher level that the royalty of mankind and of those who live by Torah. So we fight to protect it, and we fight on behalf of God. The other side is we want to permit. We want to make everything as hefker as possible. And what does that sound like? Sound familiar? Go back to Pash Kisisa and the Erev Rav, making the golden calf and dancing around it and acting licentiously. This is a drive that runs all through mankind. Sometimes in history, they did it anyhow, and they just kept it behind closed doors and hoped not to get caught. Not today. Not today. At the end of history, it's not that people have disproved God. You can't disprove God. All the science in the world can never disprove God. It can't even make you doubt the existence of God if you understand how to look at what you're reading and learning and not just take people's opinions, as your own. Just think it through. There's lots of brilliant people today who are scientists and doctors and technicians who believe in God 100%. There's no contradiction whatsoever between what they know secularly and religiously. The difference is whether a person wants to be able to do anything they feel like doing as opposed to what they want to do. The want is a soul-like thing. The feeling is a body-like thing. The Gemara says that's what the Jewish people were all about that time. So this tower, this part that was not destroyed, that remains in place, that if you climb to the top of it, even the greatest wonder of creation is nothing. Because the Torah is telling you, and the Medrash is telling you, this is a thread, a current that runs through all of history, all the time. It may take different forms, it may result in even religious things sometimes. Doesn't make a difference. It's the same drive running all through history until the very end. And people like to sound noble. They want freedom of speech, and they want freedom of action. They want people to feel that they can be anything they want in society. Why should you be different and have to feel like you don't belong? We're going to fight on your behalf. Well, the Torah says what's permissible, what's not permissible. Just like you don't say to a cancer patient and say to them, why should you be different than the person who doesn't have cancer? Go about your business as if everything is normal and live the life you want to. We don't do that because we understand there's a sickness. This is abnormal. It may be normal in the context of history, but a person needs treatment. We want this person to live, to survive, to have quality of life. And so does the person. So therefore they go to doctors and they get the treatment and they do what they have to do in order to try to get better because they understand there's a difference between this and that. And the Torah laid down the rules and said, this is Tzelem Elokim, and the other is not, and therefore, you have to work with that, with the guidelines, and treat it accordingly to try to normalize. Judge people? That's a different topic. That's a whole different thing. Condemn them? That takes a lot of authority before you can do things like that. But to pretend that something is the same or permissible when the Torah says it's not, no. So people don't like that. So what do they do instead? They build big towers, so to speak, and they normalize everything. They rationalize everything. They say, it's not God. This is not God. The coronavirus is not God. It's natural. Okay, maybe it was even conspiracy. Maybe it was men deciding that they have to reduce the fire. All kinds of different ideas, but it's not God. And what's going on today, with the riots, it's not God per se. Right? It's just nature. It's natural. It's what man does. It's how the world runs and how the world works. So therefore, God's not involved. God's not involved. Let them riot. I'm going to go home and do some kind of illicit stuff and not worry about it and have a free conscience in the end. That's the Tower, Migdal Babel. Paradigm for power. To control our own fate. To push God out of the picture so we could decide for ourselves what's permissible and what's not permissible. And we can be hypocritical. Because you know what? It doesn't make a difference. As we spoke about a few weeks ago, truth requires three things. To live by truth requires three things. Number one, you have to believe in God. You don't believe in God, there's no absolute truth. Everything comes down to a human opinion. Number two, you have to believe that God communicated his truth to us. If he didn't, the fact that he is there and he knows the truth does us no good because we don't know what it is. You have to know that he spoke about it and told us what it is. And number three, you have to know there's a thing called the Yetzer Hara, that you have an evil inclination living inside of you. That it talks, sounds like you, and tells you all kinds of things and gives you all kinds of incredible wrong instructions about who you are and what you want, and is so good. He's such a good ventriloquist that you actually think it's you talking and follow his commands. If you don't know about that and how many people actually do, and even the ones that do, how many people actually take it to heart, then you're his servant. You're doing his will, and he, for sure, wants a liberalized world, because then he could just control everything and run amok. So the ideologies may change from generation to generation, but the thread, the current, the Yetzer Hara, that's the same. And it doesn't mean that everyone knows that's what's going on inside of them. No, not necessarily. On the contrary, they could just be totally oblivious to think that's what they're doing is in fact the truth. But if you were to stop any of these people and push them far enough, and I've done this sometimes on occasion with some people in discussions, if you were to push them, ask them question after, how do you know? How do you know? What about this? How do you know? One of two things happens. Usually the second one, but two things kind of happen. Somebody will tell you, wow, I never thought about it like that. I never questioned it like that. I've got homework to do. I got to sit down and work this one out. A few people have done that and changed their lives as a result of it in the direction of Torah. The more common reaction, unfortunately, is when people go, you bug me. I had enough of you. You've made me feel bad enough as it is right now. Go someplace else. I'm going someplace else. I don't want to talk to you anymore. That's a great conclusion. That's just someone saying, my Yetzer Hara is involved. It's in control. I like what I'm doing. I like where I'm living. I like how I'm living. I can't afford to let God into the picture, because if I do, I'm going to have to reevaluate everything I'm doing and change. There's a story, the time for it, section 930, right? I think we have to do a two-part presentation, because the last section, that's the first part. The last section basically is called, actually two last sections, section 4, section 5, is two very important components, which we haven't addressed. We just sort of alluded to them. The next one is called the three faces of Esav. That's very important for understanding what's going on today and has happened historically. The last one is called the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, and that's very important for understanding what's going on today, because what we discussed until now is basically leading towards that, because we need these pieces of the puzzle to see the picture more clearly and to know where we're holding historically right now and what the events of history right now mean to us and should mean to us. Because if I could tell people, who would listen to me, what to do today, living in the diaspora, I tell them, listen, let me show you the details. Kabbalah talks about this. You're telling me you don't believe, but what's your lack of belief based on? Because someone has never told you about this, and you don't believe it, and you think it's outside some distant level of knowledge. Let me show you inside. We have a long history of being told by people that the end is coming, and that history is also long of people not listening And the rest has been destruction upon destruction upon destruction. So we have to know there's still more information to supply, but at least we can understand somewhat how the Tower of Babel laid down the rules, so to speak, about how mankind acts and how God responds to that. And how what we're doing today is all a function of that. And if it's all a function of that, then you can assume that God is going to respond to that as well, similarly. In some respects, we're less culpable because we're so distant from Mount Sinai. We lack sufficient leadership. But we can't count on that. So God willing, I think next week we'll continue on with the three faces of Esav and the Erev Rav and wrap this up. And hopefully by that point, it'll be clear that what we're going through today is extremely, extremely, extremely end of Dejish. Such a word even exists. Okay. Good night.
You don't have time for one question?
Yeah, question. I have a question.
One question.
Yeah.
Okay, that's actually my question. When you say when people have to consider God in the picture, I don't know exactly how you phrased it, but that you'd have to reevaluate your lives about where you're living and where you like to live and where, whether you should make aliyah and things like that. So I think a lot of people would take exception to that. I'm not being critical, but I'm thinking, all these frum people that live all over the rest of the world, not just America, but they say they're really religious people and they're very frum and they give tzedakah and they learn Torah all the time. And then,
just
what does that
tell
mean?
me, what does that have to do with anything? Let's go back 75, 80 years. You think the people living in Europe did mitzvahs less than we did? Our mitzvahs don't even compare to the self-sacrifice. Today we sit in Bati Midrashos and learn Torah with air conditioning and carpets and beautifully designed shuls and study houses, and we have kosher food like since Gan Eden probably you haven't seen things like that, or maybe by Mount Sinai with the miracles in the desert, and our lifestyles, the chasanas we make, compared to them, we can't even compare. They were tzaddikim. They were like, not everybody, okay? So some people say, yeah, but there's more of us today learning Torah. Well, superficially, not compared to where we're supposed to. That's where there's so much inconsistency, So I partially don't understand, given Jewish history, not my opinion, given Jewish history, what does it have to do with anything? The Gemara says in Baba Basra, okay, I think it's Yirmiyahu says it, okay? He turns to Hashem and he says, these people are so off, in terms of what's going on, to do me a favor, eat it when they give tzedakah. For the right reasons, in the right way, make it that it goes to the wrong kind of person. Because they shouldn't have the schus to be able to give tzedakah properly if they're not doing it else. The base of mikdash is not built. The people understand that the divine presence, which they say has left America completely at this point in time, according to many Mukubalim, but the divine presence still does not have its home. On the contrary, sitting in its home is a mosque, surrounded by churches. The holiest place in the entire world is occupied by foreign powers, so to speak, and not that you would. And every single day, God's in Pinam Machazir, Shechina Solet Tzion, we daven for, right? That's the priority. Everything else was to get us to this point. But you have to also realize it comes a time, and every Jew should, if every Jew cares about their life, they should take the time to learn Jewish history, especially recent Jewish history, and ask one question: why is it that we never leave an exile on time and safely? And only a few people do it. They should ask that question. And you will find that many people who perished in the past were people who learned Torah and they did their mitzvahs better than we have ever done them in our entire life. And they gave tzedakah with more self-sacrifice than we do today. And still, it wasn't the protection they required. They went to Lutakam, 100%. Schar Maba, God promised that. But if you're doing it at the wrong place, the wrong time, and this is a very important Kabbalistic point, which I won't make right now, but there's also a very big danger in doing the mitzvahs in the wrong place, the wrong time. Wow. It can actually have a reverse effect. The mitzvahs can become a virus. And that's not my opinion. That's what the Arizal teaches. You want to argue with him, that's your business. You have to know these things, but no one teaches these things. So we just have a blanket approach to it.
That's why we have you here. Thank you so much for taking your precious time to be with us. And please visit Rabbi Winston's website, 36.org. I have it up on the screen. And tap into his weekly essays on the Parsha, all of his books on everything from reincarnation to end of days to Geula Barachamim and mindfulness. All of his shirim and all of his lectures are just blow your mind amazing. And we learned so much from him. And thank you very much, Rabbi, for sharing yourself with us. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Everybody, thank you for joining us. And visit our website, please, israeltorah.org for more information on making Aliyah, how to make Aliyah, and why to make Aliyah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.